Hello everyone and welcome. Make a cup of your favorite drink and get comfortable because this is a wonderful time for news stories from cked. Send your own stories in the comments below and maybe they'll be in our new video. Subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed yet, and let's get started. What is the silliest reason you've ever had to fire a staff member? Part 5. I progressed through the ranks at one job where we developed custom enterprise apps for the insurance and health and safety sectors, working on multiple projects at once. We once worked on a project with a particular developer that was way over budget and beyond any reasonable deadline for completion, but the client was gullible, the PM was dubious, the CTO was elderly, and this was back when any project in the insurance industry took a lifetime to complete. When I was promoted from LSE to acting CTO, this project took 3 years instead of the 3 months it was supposed to for reasons previously mentioned. My first task was to wrap up this project, so I called the PM and developer into a meeting and asked finance and legal to get me a copy of everything related to this project. To get the developer out of the room because he yammers inanely constantly, lay out what needs to be done to the team, and ask them to get me any emails with the client that doesn't include the previous CTO and a printed copy of the source as it currently sits. While the PM and I are sitting in the room discussing the project while the lead developer leaves to print, I notice a strange adjustment made to the project, the timesheet of the developer and the timesheet of the PM. Apparently, there was a commotion about getting more time in when the project was approximately 6 months over schedule, so we increased the team's pay by a significant amount until the project was completed on an hourly basis, with the only oversight being an elderly man. We would have broken even on the project if they had completed it that quarter, which was 2 years ago, according to the math I did. The company was losing money on this project to these two, who were essentially writing themselves blank checks. When the printed code is finally delivered by Dev, he continues to justify things I haven't even yet discovered while I examine it. The code is an enormous stack of paper with a lot of partial HTML strings in hash defines, not in a logical way, mind you, just entire pages of HTML sliced up about every 2 characters due to the restriction on hash-defined string lengths, and a hot mess of spaghetti C, not C++, which was the company standard at the time. The documentation for the application was all in hash-defined with HTML str1 blah 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 format, chunked up every 2,000 characters or so. Some of them were valid enough if the application was even supposed to output HTML, which it wasn't. Additionally, half of them were the contents of tutorials or reference pages he used while writing the app. He cited the contents of the sources in their entirety in the source code. The application's actual code was hardly more than a sketch of what it should do, and even that is insufficient to quality as a proof of concept. I stated quite clearly that the application was in significantly worse shape than it should have been given the time it took, and that we would spend the rest of the day devising a plan to finish it by the end of the quarter, which was now 2 months away. I went to get some materials, excused myself, and spoke with HR, finance, and legal. We came to the conclusion that the project's current state could be interpreted as fraud in court by the client suing us, as well as by us suing these 2 jackholes. While I worked out a timeline with HR in the meeting room, they boxed up their belongings and cut their final checks. Meanwhile, finance and legal came up with a plan to appease a gullible but extremely patient client in case things went wrong the following day. Or we could just hire a contractor for a 10th the price you two have milked the company for over 2 years and have it done by the end of the month. Here are your termination papers. HR has your things in the lobby. You're fired. Get out, I said, pushing the packets in front of them as the HR head entered the room. I called the client using the packet I received from legal, returned more money than I care to recall, and provided them with a concrete date for the application's functional beta launch, as we dubbed it. I went through my list of past contractors and gave them a call. After that, I had a few guys who got along well scheduled to start working on the application the following day and finish it in 6 weeks. On-time delivery, but 2 years overdue. Legal was very torn about filing fraud charges against them. I recall having to let go of a staff member the Sunday before I was supposed to start work. It was 2006. I got a job managing a taxi call center when I first moved to London, UK from New Zealand. I had managed retail and then banking call centers before, so I had no prior experience with taxis. In any case, a group of minicab businesses had been acquired by an investor and combined into a single office building. After accepting the job and knowing that I would start on Monday, I received a call from the founder asking if I could come into the office right away to help with something. He didn't give me any specifics, but he was at an airport getting ready to board a flight back to London from Thailand. Nevertheless, I agreed to see what I could do to help. When I get there are a few dozen Eastern European drivers loitering outside the office. They were obviously upset or furious about something, but since they didn't know me, I ignored them and entered the building using my access card. About 10 call center employees were present. Some of them I had already met during my interview process, so at least they knew who I was and could respond to my inquiries. It turns out that the drivers were not happy that their friends, family, and so on were receiving all the more lucrative airport jobs from the dispatchers. I was informed that the system was automated and that it sent the job to the closest taxi, so I assumed that couldn't be true. Essentially, the driver would receive an automated message on his or her PDA, accept it, and then drive to the designated location to pick up the customer. The dispatcher was only needed when something unusual occurred. For example, the system would not assign a task as effectively as a human since it would assign a task based only on distance or as the crow flies as opposed to the more sensible closest car by driving distance. Since the dispatch system they were using was Russian-built, the user manual was poorly translated into English when I logged in and used it. Finally, I located a report of jobs that were assigned. It included a column listing the car number to which each job was assigned. Another column showed that the job had been manually altered, for example, from car 42 to car 89. That day, about 30% of the jobs had been altered by hand. I knew nothing about the taxi business, so I wasn't sure if this was suspicious or not. I required additional information. By hand, I was able to locate the drivers' names and car numbers. I manually put together a list consisting of driver names and cab numbers for approximately an hour, and it looked something like this. Drop-off location, job allocated to, manual change to, Gatwick Airport, 23 Nowak, 99 Con Heathrow, 56 Kowalski, 11 Ahmed Heathrow, 78 Wisniewski, 45 Hussein Gatwick Airport, 12 Wojak, 32 Ali Gatwick Airport, 1 Kowalski, 101 Akhtar. It was evident that the names of 99% of the airport jobs belonged to a different ethnic group. It appears suspicious, so I choose to speak with the dispatcher about it. I say, "Hey, so you know what's going on outside, right?" to the dispatcher, who's about 30 years older than me and has probably worked as a taxi dispatcher longer than I've lived. All I want to know is what you thought of it. He gets up right away and slams his keyboard against the monitor, sending keyboard fragments flying all over the place. The keyboard was cheap plastic, and the monitor was huge, antiquated CRT monitor. It didn't really break. And he walked out, only to be cornered by the drivers who were waiting outside after being chased down the street for about 20 meters. It was quite dramatic, but strangely no punches were exchanged. One of the drivers must have held the door from closing as the dispatcher made a run for it, because the drivers who made it into the office dragged the dispatcher back inside. And they threatened to quit if I didn't fire him right away. And faced with about 15 to 20 angry dudes with an old dispatcher and a headlock in the middle of a call center, I fired the dispatcher. How did you come to the realization that the COA, HOA, and neighbors are jerks? Part 5. They increased our rate from $75 per month to $200 over the course of 3 years in order to replace our roofs and pay for a prior embezzlement. They started by fixing the president and vice president's buildings, which were fine but rather old. They then repaired between 85 and 90% of the neighborhood, but they stopped short of my condo roof, which was literally being replaced in between other repairs, and it was beginning to resemble a patchwork quilt of repairs. After a few years, a company was hired to manage our homeowners association. When my roof finally started to leak, I sent them pictures and explained the situation. I informed them when they returned and continued to patch it, but in the process, they caused another leak in the area where they had worked. They accused me of removing a satellite dish and demanded payment, but I told them that in my 13 years of living here, I have never owned or removed a dish, and the leak wasn't there when I told them about my previous leak. Why would I space that out? Moreover, the appearance of the leak coincided with the date they reported that the repairs were made. I never heard back from them, but about a month later, I received an update from the HOA saying they were looking at replacement estimates for my roof and the neighbors next door. It happened in the end, but I still have to pay $200 a month in HOA dues, and once I sell this place and make repairs, I'll never live in an HOA again. It's BS for people that don't know how to manage their own homes or money. I'm just posting this here to counter some of the anger towards the HOA. In the 1990s, my mother ran for office in our HOA. Before being elected president, she held a few board positions. While I don't recall any significant disputes, one neighbor was against the removal of any trees or plants generally. As president, a significant structural problem was found in the neighborhood. Our suburb, which was constructed 30 to 40 years ago, is relatively new and has lagoons running through it. The wooden bulkheads that were constructed to divide land from water were found to be decaying more quickly than anticipated. My mother started looking into the problem right away and trying to find answers. In the end, she supported a contentious proposal to replace the bulkheads with concrete, which were more costly but would last much longer for both the common areas and the homeowners on the water. While some neighbors, including the one next door, chose not to participate, which concerns me for the future, the majority chose to participate. After closely monitoring the process, the city eventually adopted a similar procedure for the entire line and recommended it to the numerous other HOAs that would be impacted, most of which followed. A few years after these incidents, my mother served on the board until her death. A few years later, my father, who's now retired, received an invitation to run for board treasurer. This was partially because no one else expressed interest in the position, and partly because the board had recalled working with him and my mother on the aforementioned events. My dad concurred. Hardly a year had passed when he was chosen as HOA president. He held the position for 8 years. In addition to the tree woman, his tenure was marked by controversy over house expansions and property lines. Parties at an Airbnb home, an absentee homeowner using shared parking spaces to store used cars he bought and sold for profit, and this year's pandemic. However, none of them caused my father any significant problems. In addition, he worked to standardize guidelines for solar panels and solar roof tiles, as well as to allow homeowners to choose more colors and materials for home renovations. As a result of memory loss, he retired this year. Upon his retirement, the association received accolades from many of its members for his fair leadership and for handling finances so well that the association enjoyed its best financial standing ever and was even able to lower dues. There are many negative opinions about HOA leadership in this place, and it goes without saying that there are many negative HOA members who have merited such opinions. However, I'm proud of my parents because they both served in the military in the past and treated belonging to a homeowners association as a duty. My mother and father would frequently ask for advice on difficult decisions, my father more so, as I was already an adult. I intend to follow my parents' lead if and when the time comes for me to own a property, whether it be my own or somewhere else, with the same sense of obligation. I wouldn't want it, and there isn't any true power there that would be worthwhile. I did, however, learn from my parents that most homeowners should gain from having a responsive HOA that is available to assist, resolves conflicts amicably, and looks for ways to keep the HOA up to date. The HOA president has not posted minutes, announced meetings to homeowners, or conducted elections. After doing more research, we found that she's listed as the president of the HOA and that the other two board members are people who do not even own real estate in the complex. This information is submitted by the HOA annually. Not even a list of the other board members who are presently on board exists. Technically speaking, she's been the only board member. However, she's operating an unlicensed and non-complacent board. Additionally, despite not even reading the CCR, she has not been adhering to them. She's been delaying building and roof repairs. It's also worth mentioning that our statements have been negative for a long time because she stopped performing audits and paying HOA dues. Repairs to our roof will now have to be covered out of pocket. I want to sue her straight, not through the HOA. Legally speaking, she was the only board member, and as a result of her carelessness and ignorance, our complex is in financial ruin. Edit. I talked to a lawyer I know, and he said that we have a good chance of ousting her if we file a class action lawsuit against her as disgruntled HOA residents. So, I talked to my neighbors. More than half of them agreed to file a complaint against her. We started the process. These are the results we got. She was fired as head of the HOA. Also, court found her guilty, and she has to compensate for all the losses the HOA suffered. She has to sell her property. She's moving on, and hopefully we'll never see her again. If you want to watch the part 4, click the link here. I'm very glad to see you all in the comments again. Many thanks for your support.